It was just another regular day in the office, or so I thought. I had been the CEO of this company for a few years now, but recently things felt off. The atmosphere was tense, people barely spoke to each other, and I noticed a lot of employees seemed drained. Something was wrong, but no one was willing to speak up. Little did they know, I had made a decision to see things from their point of view. I decided to go undercover, posing as a regular employee to get to the bottom of what was happening. The thought made my heart race, but I knew it was the only way to truly understand the culture I had worked so hard to build. I started the day by sitting at a random desk, not too far from the break room, where most employees gathered during their breaks. My new identity was simple enough, unassuming, dressed like everyone else, and carrying a slightly nervous energy. I introduced myself to a few people, trying to blend in, trying to be just another face in the crowd. It wasn't long before I noticed something unsettling. People's eyes would flicker nervously whenever the manager Mark passed by. The whispers stopped the moment he entered a room. It was like they were walking on eggshells around him. Later that morning, I found myself watching something that would stay with me for a long time. Mark, the manager who had cultivated an atmosphere of fear throughout the office, was in the middle of a conversation with one of the junior staff members, Lisa. I had heard about Lisa's dedication to her work. She was one of the most diligent employees on the team. She had been putting in extra hours, fine-tuning her project, and I could see how excited she was to present her ideas to the group. But then, as she started speaking, Mark's demeanor shifted. His once neutral expression turned cold, and he immediately began to dismiss her efforts. He barely let her finish a sentence before interrupting with condescending remarks. "Are you serious?" he said, a sarcastic laugh escaping his lips. "This is what you've been working on? It's a waste of time." I watched, horrified, as Lisa's face turned a deep shade of red. She had clearly put her heart into her work, and yet here was Mark, reducing it to nothing with a few cruel words. But it didn't stop there. He kept on mocking her in front of the rest of the team. The words were sharp, meant to break her spirit, and he did so without a second thought. The others in the room stood frozen, too afraid to intervene, their eyes fixed on the floor. They could feel the weight of the tension, the oppression Mark created with every sentence. Lisa's shoulders slumped, and she seemed to shrink in front of all of us. Her excitement had evaporated, replaced by humiliation and self-doubt. She tried to speak up, to defend her ideas, but Mark wouldn't let her. "Listen, Lisa," he said, his voice rising. "You're just not cut out for this. You'll never make it in this field if you keep wasting everyone's time with nonsense like this." His sneer was unmistakable, and the venom in his tone was unmistakable. At that moment, I could feel a knot form in my stomach. The silence in the room was suffocating. No one dared to say a word. I could hear Lisa's breath catch in her throat, but she didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, a gesture of surrender. I had been observing Mark for a while, but this was something different. It wasn't just bad management, it was cruelty. Bullying, plain and simple. I couldn't understand how someone in a leadership position could treat another person like that, especially in front of their peers. It made my blood boil to see someone so vulnerable being torn down, all because of one man's inflated ego. I couldn't imagine what it must have felt like for Lisa. Her hard work, her passion, reduced to nothing. It was heart-wrenching to watch, and even worse, I knew this wasn't a one-time occurrence. The more I watched, the more I realized that this toxic behavior was a pattern for Mark. It wasn't leadership. He was using his position to manipulate and intimidate those beneath him. The day carried on, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. It was as though the energy in the office had shifted. There was a heavy, oppressive silence that hung over everything, and I could see it in the way people interacted with each other. No one was talking much anymore. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves, didn't want to risk a confrontation with Mark. I kept my eyes on him throughout the day, wanting to see if this was just a rare incident. But as time passed, it became clear that it wasn't. Mark's behavior didn't change. He was harsh, quick to criticize, and showed no empathy for anyone. His voice was always sharp, his demeanor cold. Every interaction was a reminder of the power he wielded, the fear he instilled. What struck me the most was how others reacted. I overheard whispers in the break room, snippets of conversations between employees who had clearly reached their breaking point. "I can't take another day of this," one said, her voice quiet, almost defeated. "Tomorrow's gonna be the same. He's just going to tear me down again." It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had heard rumors, sure, but now, seeing it play out before my eyes, the depth of the toxic culture Mark had fostered was undeniable. The way employees tiptoed around him, avoiding eye contact, shifting nervously in their seats when he walked by, it was clear that fear had become part of the office's DNA. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, a sadness so deep it hurt. These people didn't deserve this. They were talented, dedicated, and hardworking, yet they were being stifled by a manager who saw them only as tools to be used, not people with hopes, dreams, and emotions. It made me sick to think about how many people had been affected by Mark's behavior over the years. No one should ever feel this way at work. No one should have to face another day of anxiety, walking on eggshells, wondering what kind of mood their boss would be in. They came to work every day to contribute, to grow, to be part of something bigger, but instead, they were met with harsh criticism and emotional exhaustion. This wasn't just poor management. This was a toxic environment that was slowly poisoning the morale of the entire team. I knew something had to be done. Watching the aftermath of Mark's actions only made me more determined. I couldn't allow this to continue any longer. Not under my watch. Not in my company. That afternoon, after hours of quietly observing the damage Mark had caused, I decided it was time to act. I couldn't stand idly by any longer, letting him continue to break down my team. It was time to confront him, to make him see the consequences of his actions. I walked down the hallway with determination, my thoughts racing. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I knocked on the door of his office, keeping my face neutral. When he motioned for me to come in, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Mark was sitting behind his desk, his usual smug grin plastered on his face as he looked up from his computer. I could tell he didn't recognize me. Not yet anyway. I was just another employee in his eyes. I could feel the heat of anger rise in my chest, but I fought to remain calm, my voice steady but unwavering. "Mark," I began, keeping my tone controlled despite the fury I felt. "I've been watching you today, and I'm disgusted by what I've seen." He looked at me, blinking in surprise. The cocky grin he always wore faded, and for a split second I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He quickly recovered, though, trying to brush it off. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice betraying the tension he felt. I took a step closer to his desk, locking eyes with him. "I've seen how you treat the staff. You humiliate people, break them down, and make them feel worthless. Why do you do that?" There was a shift in the room as Mark's expression darkened. He leaned back in his chair, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, his voice tight with anger. But I wasn't backing down. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, each word coming out with more conviction. "I'm the CEO of this company." The realization hit him like a freight train. His face went pale, his eyes widening in disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. It was as if he was trying to process the situation, trying to grasp what was happening. You're the CEO?" he asked, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly, watching his world crumble around him. For the first time since I had walked into that office, Mark wasn't the confident, arrogant man I had come to know. Instead, he was a man caught completely off guard. I could see the panic building in his eyes as the gravity of the situation set in. His smugness was gone, replaced with fear and uncertainty. "I've seen enough," I said, my voice hardening. "This ends today." There was a long, tense silence between us. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the real Mark, the man behind the facade. It was a side of him I hadn't expected, and it unsettled me. He tried to speak, to explain himself, but his words were lost. His arrogance had faded, leaving nothing but an uncomfortable silence. I didn't need him to say anything more. I knew exactly what had to be done. The damage he had caused was irreversible, but I wasn't going to allow him to hurt anyone else. Not on my watch. I had said all I needed to say. There was no more room for negotiation or justification. This was no longer a matter of trying to fix things, it was about making sure Mark understood the consequences of his actions. I stood there for a moment, watching him squirm, feeling a sense of justice wash over me. "Mark, you've made this office a toxic place," I continued, my voice steady but unwavering. "The way you treat people is unacceptable, and it ends now." His face twisted with a mix of confusion and anger. But I could tell he was too overwhelmed by the revelation to respond coherently. He opened his mouth a few times, but no words came out. It was clear he didn't know how to handle the situation. "You're fired, Mark," I said simply, watching as his face drained of color. His arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by a look of pure panic. You can't do this," he stammered, as if trying to argue his way out. "I've been here for years." I gave him a hard look, my voice calm but firm. "You've been here for years, but you've created an environment where no one feels safe. That's not leadership, that's abuse." He stood up, his hands shaking, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and rage. "This isn't over," he muttered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It was over. And as I walked out of his office, I knew I had done the right thing. The office had been infected by his presence for far too long, and now it was time for things to change. Mark's removal from his position was swift. It had to be. The news spread quickly through the office, and the relief was palpable. I could feel the change in the air as soon as I stepped out of his office. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and it was as if a weight had been taken off everyone's shoulders. The staff began to interact more openly, smiling, laughing, and speaking freely without the fear of being reprimanded for something trivial. I watched as people started to relax, their energy shifting from tense to hopeful. It was amazing how quickly the environment changed, how quickly things could feel right again. Lisa, the young woman who had been humiliated earlier in the day, was the first to benefit from the change. I called her into my office, where I apologized for what she had endured. Her eyes were still red from the earlier confrontation, but there was a spark of gratitude in them, as I offered her the recognition she deserved. "You've been doing amazing work, Lisa," I said, watching her eyes widen in surprise. "You've earned the chance to lead the project you've been working on. I believe in you, and I want to give you the opportunity to prove it." Her face lit up, the weight of the morning's humiliation lifting from her shoulders. She couldn't stop smiling, and I could see the confidence building in her with every word I spoke. She was more than capable, and now she had the chance to show it. As I watched her leave my office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just for Lisa, but for the entire team. They deserved a leader who cared about them, who saw their potential, and who would never allow someone like Mark to break their spirits. The office was healing, and I knew I had made the right decision. The toxic cloud had been lifted, and with it, a new chapter for the company had begun. As I walked through the office that evening, I took a moment to reflect on the day. What had happened had been heartbreaking, but it was also eye-opening. I had learned just how deeply toxic behavior could infiltrate a workplace and how far-reaching its effects were. The most powerful lesson I walked away with, however, was the importance of empathy, leadership, and trust. I had to lead with care, not fear. People weren't just employees, they were human beings, and they deserved respect. I promised myself I would never let anything like that happen again. From that moment forward, my focus would always be on lifting people up, not tearing them down. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more captivating content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. Like the video if it resonated with you, and feel free to comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you think others would enjoy this story too, make sure to share it with your friends. Your support means the world to me, and it helps the channel grow. Thanks again, and stay tuned for more exciting stories.